Hello YouTube! A little later than advertised, as I've had a few bits and pieces going on in my real life over the last few days. Yes, I actually have a real life! I know, it's shocking, isn't it? Anyway, my novel's arrived. I'll be sending this off to charity soon, along with this one. So it doesn't make much sense to me to send the second one if they're not going to be able to read the first. You know, my original idea was maybe that it would encourage people to read the first one, but then I was like, same with the competition thing. And I decided it's probably best to give out both of them. It'd be some good publicity for me. Anyway, I'm going to do a reading. I'm going to be reading chapter 22, which is about 2/3 of the way through the novel. It's a fairly short chapter, so I'm going to read the entirety of it. Yeah. So, without further ado, chapter 22. Ha! That rhymes. He could smell cinnamon, drifting to him gently, filling the whole room with its warm, mildly spicy tang. He hadn't had anything with cinnamon for years. In fact, it had been so long, he couldn't remember when the last time was. Or even what it had been. Some kind of confectionery, probably. Buns, perhaps? His aunt used to make them all the time. She was always baking something. He'd helped her out a few times, selling them along the trail, hunting parties and the odd passing patrol of guards. A fresh, handmade sweet bun, as he knew himself, was incredibly satisfying after a long march, and a glass of freshly pulled, still warm milk was the perfect chaser. But there was something off about that. He didn't have an aunt. Well, he did. He had several, most likely. Why could he no longer clearly remember? He did have family, didn't he? He must have. Everybody did. But, for certain, he knew he did not have any that served homemade confectionery to hunters and city guards. They weren't even called city guards anymore. There was just something wrong about this, but the smell of cinnamon was so pervasive, he could feel, as well as hear, his tummy growling at him. And why couldn't he see? Everything was black, and his nostrils were blocked. An irony tang, which he hadn't noticed, an irony tang. Why he hadn't noticed that to begin with. Now that he had, though, the cinnamon was fleeing as though it had never existed. And thinking about it, perhaps it had not existed to begin with. Was his mind playing tricks on him again? Probably. But why would it be doing that? Where was he? What was he doing here? He's awake again. A moderately familiar voice drifted to him, revealing that his hearing was also impeded. His face was puffy and sore, and his eyes were burning. Yeah, he growled, because his throat was parched. A glass of warm milk and a cinnamon bun sounded real good right about now. I'm awake. The effort set him off coughing, the taste of iron filling his mouth to join its twin. Taste and smell and pervasive ache running through his body. Someone had been roughing him over. It was no real surprise he had been drifting back to fonder memories. What was he even doing here? And why was he asking that? Again. He'd already been through it all. He knew he had. And he had a feeling, last time, it had all come flooding back to him. He was certain of that, but here he was right back at the beginning, and someone was calling his name. A breathy, sing-song female voice, comforting and familiar. Wake up, damn it, she was growling directly into his ear. Wait, that was wrong. It was all wrong. And why had the pain not gone away? Elof, wake up! He sat bolt upright, cursing himself even as he was doing it. The pain in his chest. Ugh! How had he let this happen? That was extremely stupid of him. He would be fine, with a little time to recover, of course, but damn, that hurt. Armor-piercing bullets to the chest had a habit of doing that, though. What had possessed him to think he needed a reminder? I'm up, he coughed, the rattle in his chest sending a new wave of agony through him, but not nearly as much as he deserved. You've been busy, he observed. I couldn't just let you die, she bit back. I wasn't going to die, Hilva, he told her, coughing again, and she knew that. You should have saved your energy. I know how much it hurts you. We do what we must. She was smirking. He knew she was smirking. Smart ass. He couldn't help but smile at that. Where did they take her? I don't know for certain. He bit back his initial response. I was a little distracted. Then we have no time to waste. He pushed himself, rather awkwardly, to his feet, swaying violently. Bloodlass is a bitch. She can wait, Ilva told him, in that tone he dreaded, even if he wasn't half dead. In fact, say it what it was. He should be fully dead. That's what we call it what it was. Anyone else, after taking 3 NATO shells to the chest, life expectancy drops off violently. Okay, he grumbled, dusting off his overcoat. Funny how that was the thing he was focusing on now. His overcoat was, of course, so much more important right now. Okay, we wait, but not for long. I'll meet you halfway, she suggested, sidling up close to him. I'll find her. You find somewhere quiet to heal up. 1 hour, he told her. You have 1 hour. Fine. He could hear her nodding, literally hear it. The weave between them was far thinner than usual. Traumatic events tended to have that effect. But what was the trauma this time? The holes in his chest, or the attachment he had developed with Hannah? They can't have taken her very far, though, he told her, speaking quickly so that she could not have time to interrupt. So we'll go together. I'll take it slow and do what I can on the way. Then I'll stop when we arrive. She was silent, but he could feel the anger rolling off her, and fully justified too. He didn't know himself for certain why this was bothering him so much. Even without Ilva's gift for foresight, he knew that Hannah and the 2 others would be unhurt. For now, at least. He had time. So why was it so important? He could use the age argument, of course, and that was genuinely bothering him. She was just a kid, and as an adult it was his responsibility to keep her safe. But there was more to it than that, and he couldn't fathom out what was pressing on him so heavily. But it was a nagging itch he could not and would not ignore. I'll drive. There's a slight problem with that, she interjected softly, clearly driving his attention back to the mangled, shorn metal that had once been a sedan. Because that's the only car on the planet, he drawled, and started wondering. A rocket launcher fired off in a populated area like this. Why had no one come to see what was happening already? He could see small cottages only a few hundred feet away, starting at the base of a small hill and running all the way up on top of it. You're a thief now, huh? Did stealing the car, he jerked his thumb to it, wincing at the pain in his chest, give it away? That was a little different, she insisted. They were trying to kill you. You're talking about taking a car from, potentially, a family home. I'll post 10,000 quid through their letterbox, he grumbled, forcing himself not to shrug. The gesture would hurt like hell. Why were there no bloody ribbons around? He needed some. Okay, you've made your point. He meant it too. He really would. They'll probably be better off for it. Now come on. Oddly enough, he chose an old and decidedly decrepit, run-down shed of a car. She had been expecting him to go for a more recent, more powerful vehicle, but no. As soon as he saw it, he had ignored everything else. And she wasn't quite sure why. But he was right. Whoever owned this thing, they would be much better off with the large wad of banknotes and rapidly scrawled apology note than the literal metal box on wheels. He wasn't much up on cars. She knew that. He knew a little about them. He was a, as he put it himself, competent amateur. So she was puzzled why he had chosen this one. She had felt no real pull of the entropic string, not even a ripple that indicated any significant connotation. But he had been adamant, and she didn't see any reason to argue. As they drove, she allowed her focus to diminish. She had agreed to find Hannah and the 2 men. To do that, she had to open herself up to the vagaries of fate. She was running on autopilot, and it would render her almost entirely useless to him later. But it was a calculated weakening. He was much more wary now, and his focus was back. Whatever had led to him being so careless, he was past it now. Perhaps it was a necessary lapse brought on by something else. A not-so-subtle reminder that he had a difficult time ahead of him. It wouldn't be the first time, and if it was a warning, which had also happened before, it hadn't worked. They never did. As he drove, he gathered up the ribbons. There was a truly shocking lack of them. Rural areas like this commonly had bare patches, but overall there were usually more of them. The land in its natural state, the undisturbed flora and fauna, the birds and insects and other animals, all of those things. He would have to come back here at some point and solve the mystery. It may not have seemed like much, but it was entirely unnatural, and that, he had learned from past events, was never a good thing. It was probably something he should be paying attention to immediately. Things like this, when pushed to the side, invariably led to far greater problems in the long term. But he couldn't, and he wouldn't forget about his new friends. Friends. What a novel concept. Friends were not something that featured in his life. Even Ilva, close as they were, was not truly a friend. Well, now he had to find them, and he could not afford to spare any ribbons to help him. Finding them would be useless if he couldn't protect himself. And he was still having problems with his throat, never mind his chest. Though he had to say, whatever Hannah had done to him, it had been damned good. She was a talented kid. But best not start thinking about all that again. After a few minutes of apparently aimless driving, he pulled over to the side, cursing violently. The bleeding in his chest had stopped, and the wounds themselves were well on their way to healing, but he did not have the resources he needed to fix it completely, so he would have to be careful. Effectively, he was as though in the latter stages of recovery. For a regular person, a few more days, maybe a week, and he could call himself fit for work. But right now, anything too strenuous, and he could reopen the wound. Literally. And the drying, but still tacky blood on his shirt was really pissing him off. But not as much as the situation that had caused it. "We'll do it your way," he growled, wringing his fingers in the steering wheel. "I'll wait until you find her, but do not," he took a steady, calming breath, "do not screw me on this. You tell me as soon as you find them." She was silent for a long moment. He could feel her eyes, ethereal though they may be, boring into the back of his head. She took a breath, and he heard her nod. "Very well. Thank you," he nodded. "Then, in return, I will do what you asked of me." "Very well," she said again, her voice already starting to grow distant, and that left him at a loose end. He knew what he needed to do. He should sleep, allow his body's natural rhythm to reinforce the magical effects he had already funneled into healing. But that wasn't going to happen, no matter how tired he was. Sleeping had never been easy for him, and right now he was far too pent up to even consider it, so, of course, he was unconscious almost instantly. Funny how that always seems to happen. He dreamed. He was certain he dreamed, but the details eluded him. Not that it was a bad thing. He had a feeling he didn't want to remember these particular fever dreams. Such experiences were rarely pleasant, and these, he reasoned, were certain to be even less so. He awoke, again, to the scent of cinnamon in his nostrils. No longer a fuzzy, comforting memory. This was real. The fresh aroma of baking bread. It reminded him of high school, when he had waited for the bus with his stepsister, and had been out front of a bakery, and every morning they had stopped for freshly baked, still hot, iced fingers. "Was it to bruh?" It meant to inquire about the time, but his tongue was large and unresponsive in his mouth, and he could taste blood. He hadn't noticed it earlier, because he had been so focused on his own stupidity, but one of the shells had pierced his left lung, and the blood had seeped in. Every time he coughed, some had come up in his spittle. "What's Emery?" He tried again. It was close enough, he supposed, for now. The lack of response, however, was not so good, but his brain was still too addled to pick up on that yet. He rubbed at his eyes, heavy with sleep, with the knuckles of one hand. Not that it helped. Both hands were slick with blood, just starting to turn tacky, but still fresh. His wounds must have reopened at some point, though they seemed to be sealed again now. He tried again, using the end of his sleeve, and cast around for the clock on the dash, but there was not one. The sedan he had been driving earlier had had an LED built in, but this car was much older, and the fact he was looking at the dashboard rather than looking to his own timepiece only served to highlight how tired he really was. He had only been out for about 45 minutes, but it was long enough for the first stirrings of morning to begin making themselves evident. The sun would not be fully risen for another hour or so yet, but the daily routine was setting in, and that, slow though it had been for him to catch on, was the reason for the cinnamon smell. There was a bakery not too far from him. When he had stopped, not only had he been distracted, but everything was closed up and dark, so he had not noticed it. But now his stomach was calling his attention to it almost pointedly. He had not eaten for almost 2 days, and it had been several hours since he had drank anything either. It may seem like a selfish frivolity, but stopping to eat was a very sensible idea. Wounded as he was, he needed every advantage he could get. There was a hard rap on the window. It came so suddenly that he wanted to jump, but he found he was still too weary even for that. He just turned, sluggish, expecting to be forced to offer a hasty explanation for his condition. But no. He saw a young girl, in her mid-teens most likely, wrapped up tightly against the winter chill, her cheeks pink and round, the very picture of youth. She was smiling warmly and holding a small brown paper bag aloft. He rolled down the window, idly wondering, but not really caring, why she was not more concerned with the state of his shirt. She was oblivious, like she couldn't even see it, and he wasn't about to argue. "Thank you," he said, automatic, taking the proffered bag from her. His smile was weak and painful, but he threw as much into it as he could. "You're welcome," she smiled again, a broad, genuine grin. "Drive safely." "Thank you," he said again, nodding his assent. "Goodbye," she beamed, waving even as she ran back to the warmth of the bakery. He had no idea what had brought her to him, but he was not going to complain. Fresh cinnamon buns were not something to scoff at. And a bottle of milk, too. It was like a half-forgotten dream had stepped right out of his mind, and it was just what he needed right now. He settled back in the driver's seat, the cold air blowing in from the open window, refreshing. Where was Ilva? Why had that girl brought him cinnamon buns? Why was the bag cold against his leg? The latter mystery, at least, he solved by opening it and taking a bleary-eyed look inside. There was a half-pint bottle of milk nestled in with them, a small wad of napkins in between, and the mouth-wateringly warm buns. The rest could wait. He'd been running on adrenaline so much lately, he hadn't had time to even consider how hungry he had become. But now that he had stopped, it was all catching up to him. He had to slow down. One of these days, it really was going to kill him, like it almost had last night, or this morning. He couldn't keep track of how much time had passed anymore. Eat something, he told himself, taking small comfort that the words came out correctly, if painfully. His throat was burning, and his chest felt like a horse had been using him as a trampoline. That was a curious image, and it made him smile, albeit awkwardly. He sighed heavily, letting his body sag. Ilva was right. He did need to rest. He should rest. He wanted to rest. But he wasn't going to. Wherever she had gone, he was sure she would be back soon. So he would meet her halfway. Again. He would wait, eat the buns and drink the milk, and then act once she had returned. In fact, she had probably played some part in them being brought to him. She had her ways. But gods, was he tired. It wasn't the first time that he had been shot. It was not even the first time he had taken a fatal blow, and he had seen more than his fair share of combat, but he hadn't pushed himself this much in a long time. And he felt old. Much older than his 24, now almost 25 years of life. He felt and acted like a tired old war dog. Was he really so young? It was hard to believe. But no matter, he would worry about that later. Right now he was famished, but he wet his lips again. Much as his stomach screamed at him for something more substantial, the dryness of it in his mouth and throat were more insistent. He forced himself to drink slowly, and not guzzle it all down at once. And even then, almost 2/3 of it was gone before he could tear himself away. But already, strange though it was, already he was feeling better. It's amazing how much difference a few mouthfuls of milk can make. Must be all the calcium. I needed that, he said aloud, now finding the strength to roll the window back up. Snow had been drifting in and settling onto his lap. A cold would be all he needed. Best to warm himself up quickly then. He turned the car's engine back over, even though it would take some time for the engine to heat up enough to blow anything but cold air out of the heater. In the meantime, he could help it along by warming himself from the inside too. And the buns, and the memories they brought with them, would do that a treat. He tore through them with relish, pulling off large, fluffy chunks and savouring the fresh blast of spices with each one. His body still screaming for him to wolf it down. He thought of Ilva and grinned. Nevertheless, obeyed his command to linger on every single bite. It was delectable. And he made a mental note. Whilst he was solving the mystery of the lack of ribbons, he would have to stop in and make a purchase at the bakery again. It was a small, privately owned, local establishment. He could tell by the simple elegance of the shop sign. They were successful, no doubt, but they did not have the sheer force of a nationwide franchise behind them. Left to right, he read aloud idly. That's W-R-I-T-E, by the way. And he felt Ilva's approach as he did so, but also an odd nagging in the back of his head. That was relevant, he was sure of it, but he could not quite place his finger on why, or from where he knew it. I found them, Ilva told him dreamily. She was barely here, he could tell. He felt responsible for that. He knew how much it could take out of her, and it was clear that she had gone all out this time. One day, he vowed, one day he would make all of this up to her. Where are they? He asked slowly, fighting the agitation back down. He put as much gratitude as was humanly possible into those 3 words, even if she was too spaced out to recognize him. Show you, was all she said. He could feel her drifting into the car, almost completely removed from the material world. As soon as his friends were safe, he was going to take her somewhere and let her gorge herself. It was the least he could do. And was so much less than she deserved. I hate this part, he said quietly, settling himself into the driver's seat as comfortably as he could. He pulled at the ribbons around him, glad to find that a more sizable congregation had built up as he slept. The girl, also, had brought some with her, tagging along for the ride. It was likely the bakery was thriving with them. Such places usually were. And then she touched him, physically and magically. The sensation tore through him, sliding in between the infinitesimal gaps between every molecule of his being. It was like he was being torn apart, everything being pulled apart all at once on a scale smaller than even the nuclei of each cell. If she had been more aware, she could have protected him, cushioned him somewhat, but even then, it would still be agony. This time, though, she had overtaxed herself, and he bore the full brunt of it alone. It had happened before a couple of times, but those times he had been far more hardy than he was now. He felt his heart stop. Just stop. It tilted its head, metaphysically speaking, and gave him a questioning look. He could hear it asking, "How are you not dead?" But he could not answer. He gritted his teeth, dug his nails into his legs, and still he heard himself cry out. His whole body was shaking, convulsing wildly, and, probably, that was what kick-started his heart to start beating again, reminded his blood to continue running through his body. And it did. Violently slow. Blood welled up in his ears and the corners of his eyes, and he could feel it distantly weeping and running down his face. He felt his teeth bite deeply into his tongue, and the fresh blood of liquid tin in his mouth. He coughed, spit it into the car's dashboard, and fought to stay upright. Then it was over, and he was gasping for breath as he slumped forwards, folding in on himself. He knew where they were. If asked, he would not be able to give an address, or any form of directions, but he knew he could find them, and they were okay. That was the important thing, but it would not last for much longer. He had very little time, and far more was riding on this than he had first realized. Worse yet, Pilfer didn't know either. He would have to tell her, but not now. Now was the time for action. And act he did. He finished the last of the milk, wincing as it stung the wounds in his tongue, even as he was gunning the engine. It was an old car, yes, and it wasn't particularly fast, but the engine was solid and reliable, and the frame was tough and durable. And now, he knew, he was going to demonstrate exactly why he needed both. So, yes, I seriously did just write a 10-page chapter about cinnamon buns and fresh milk. And that's just one small section of, as yet,